I didn't go upstairs to cry. I went upstairs to think. My bedroom felt different the moment I stepped into it, like the air had been breathed by someone else. The curtains were half drawn, turning the late afternoon into a muted, bluish dusk. I closed the door behind me softly, and the click sounded final. I stood there with my back against the wood, coat still on, arms hanging loose at my sides, and I let my body speak to me. My heart was beating hard but steady. My fingertips were cold. My stomach had that slow, sick roll of nausea that comes when your mind is trying to catch up with what your instincts already accepted. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer where I kept things I rarely touched: spare keys, old bank letters, a small velvet box with my mother's earrings. The drawer glided out smoothly, familiar, and it hit me, sharp and stupid, that I missed when this house belonged to me without argument. I reached past the velvet box and pulled out a small notebook I hadn't opened in years. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't poetic. It was practical: lists, passwords, account notes, dates. I'd started it when I bought the house because my mother's last gift to me, besides money, was the reminder that security is built with boring details. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the notebook, and traced the ink with my finger as if I could anchor myself with paper. Mortgage account. Insurance provider. Solicitor's contact. Deed paperwork reference. I heard faint movement downstairs, soft footsteps, the hush of a drawer closing, the murmur of voices I refused to translate into words. I didn't need their dialogue in my head. I had enough noise. I took my phone out and began to scroll through emails, slowly, methodically, like I was combing through a crime scene. And then, after 3 minutes of nothing but ordinary newsletters and work updates, I found it. An email from the bank, dated 3 weeks ago. Subject line: a confirmation of appointment and documentation. My throat tightened. I opened it, and my eyes moved over the text. It referenced a meeting I never attended. It referenced forms I never signed in person. It referenced an identity verification I completed. I felt heat rush up my neck. I whispered to myself, barely audible, as if the walls might be listening. No. I scrolled lower. There was an attached PDF. My fingers hovered over it. For a moment I didn't open it because I knew that once I did, I couldn't go back to pretending this was just an affair, just a betrayal of bodies and vows. This was something else. This was theft. I opened it. The screen loaded slowly, and the page appeared, clean, official, and sickening. My name was on it. My address. My house. And then, under E co-applicant E or E additional party, there was another name. Mara. I stared until my eyes burned. A low sound came out of me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. My stomach twisted as if my organs were trying to recoil from the reality. I read every line twice. 3 times. My brain kept insisting it couldn't be true because it was too bold, too insane. But there it was in black and white, a process in motion, a link being formed, paperwork that would give her a foothold. A legal foothold in my home. My fingers tightened around the phone so hard it hurt. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. I looked out at the street, at the quiet world going on as usual, and I felt something colder than anger settle into me. It was clarity. Because now I understood, Mara hadn't stumbled into my life by accident. She hadn't shown up on my porch because she was desperate. She had chosen my door. I went back to the bed and sat again. My body was moving like a machine now, no wasted motion, no drama. The calm that had frightened me in Act 1 became my weapon here. I flipped to another email, older, months ago, The day Mara arrived. The day she cried on my porch. The day Evan's hand rested on my back, and I thought it meant protection. There was a message chain between Mara and me from that day. I scrolled, reading her words, carefully curated helplessness, gratitude, desperation. And then I did something I hadn't done before. I searched her name in my inbox. Hundreds of results. Years of friendship. Birthday plans. Late-night confessions. But mixed in among them were emails I hadn't noticed because they weren't sent to me. They were sent to Evan. Some were forwarded to my home email by accident. Notifications, shared documents, household admin. And in those forwarded threads, I saw it. A message from Mara to Evan, dated before she ever arrived, before she ever knocked. The subject line, do you think she'll say yes? My breath stopped. I opened it. It was short. Not romantic. Strategic. A plan spoken like a grocery list. And as I read it, it felt like the floor beneath me turned to ice. There was no hesitation in her tone, no shame. Only certainty. The next message in the chain was Evan's response. A short, cowardly response. Not refusal. Not outrage. Agreement. My mouth went dry. I stared at the screen, and then, slowly, I lowered the phone into my lap and let the weight of it sink into my thighs. It wasn't just Mara. It wasn't just seduction, or weakness, or a lonely husband being manipulated. Evan had been cooperating. Evan had been resentful of the house being in my name. I could see it now in every small argument we'd ever had about money, about a fairness, about how he didn't feel like it was his. He'd never wanted to build alongside me. He wanted to take. And Mara was the blade he chose. I sat there a long time, breathing slowly through my nose, letting the reality drip into me. Then I got up and walked into the bathroom. I turned on the tap and splashed cold water on my face. The shock made my skin prickle, made my eyes sting. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was slightly messy. My cheeks were pale. My eyes looked darker than usual, as if someone had smudged shadow under them. But there was something else there too, something firm. I leaned closer to my reflection and spoke quietly, directly, to myself. You are not going to beg for your life back, I said. You are going to take it. I dried my face with a towel, then walked to the wardrobe and changed out of my coat. I chose something simple, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, boots. Clothes that made me feel grounded. Real. Then I went downstairs. The kitchen was quieter now. The food on the stove had been turned off. The plates were gone. They were in the living room. I stopped in the doorway and took them in with a calm that tasted like metal. Mara was curled on the sofa, one hand on her stomach, performing fragility like it was her profession. Evan sat beside her, his body angled toward her. His hand rested on her knee. My husband's hand. On my best friend's knee. In my living room. I walked in slowly and stood in front of them. Neither of them spoke out loud that I will repeat here, but their faces did. Mara's expression was sharpened now, less victim, more possession. Evan's was tense, wary, as if he could sense a shift he couldn't name. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I've just seen the email from the bank, I said softly. Evan's face changed. A flicker of panic. A flash of anger. Mara's eyes narrowed. I tilted my head. I've also seen the forwarded messages, I added. The ones you didn't mean for me to see. Evan swallowed. Mara's hand tightened on her stomach like she was reminding me of her weapon. I let my gaze drift to that hand. Your pregnancy, I said calmly, is a performance. Mara's lips parted as if to protest. I lifted a hand gently, stopping the attempt. Don't, I said. Not tonight. I stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, voice low and even. I'm going to leave this house for the night. Because I'm not going to be the woman who screams and throws things while you both watch and decide I'm unstable. Evan's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised. Mara's eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected surrender. I smiled again, slow. But understand this, I said. Me leaving tonight is not me losing. I leaned down just a fraction, my voice dropping into something intimate and dangerous. It's me stepping back far enough to aim. I straightened and looked at Evan, letting him see the calm in my eyes. And if either of you touch another document, I said, if either of you sign another line, if either of you try to intercept a single letter, I promise you, you will regret the day you learned my address. Mara's expression tightened. Evan's jaw clenched. I turned away without waiting for their response. I walked upstairs, took a small suitcase, and packed like I was packing for a business trip. Efficient. Controlled. As I zipped the bag, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I left the house with my head high and my spine straight, and I didn't look back at the porch light. Because I knew something they didn't. The house wasn't the only thing with a deed. Trust has paperwork too. And I was about to make them sign for what they'd done. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't go to my sister's. I didn't go anywhere that would turn this into a dramatic rescue story. I went to a hotel. A quiet one, clean and anonymous, where the carpet smelled faintly of detergent and the air conditioning hummed like white noise. I checked in with a steady voice. I smiled politely. I thanked the receptionist. Then I went into my room, locked the door, set my suitcase down, and let myself exhale for the first time in weeks. My body wanted to collapse. My knees ached. My shoulders felt tight, as if they'd been holding up a ceiling. But I didn't collapse. I sat at the small desk, opened my laptop, and began to work. The first thing I did was call the bank the moment they opened the next morning. I spoke calmly, professionally, like a woman sorting out an administrative error. My name is, I said, giving them my details. I'm calling because there appears to be documentation linked to my property that I did not authorize. I listened. I asked questions. I wrote notes. And when the person on the line tried to soften it, tried to minimize it, I kept my voice even. This is not confusion, I said. This is fraud. The word hung in the air like a blade. I requested copies. I requested logs. I requested verification details. I asked for the exact date and time identity checks were completed, the method used, the IP addresses involved. Every answer became a brick. After that, I called my solicitor, the one who had handled my purchase. When she answered, I spoke in a voice that did not shake. I need you to check the status of my deed and any filings, I said. Immediately. As she spoke, my hands tightened on the phone. I felt something grim and satisfying begin to form inside me, not joy, not relief, but the beginning of control. Then I did the thing Mara and Evan had not expected. I didn't confront them directly again. I didn't send angry messages. I didn't plead. I built a trap. I knew Mara. I knew what she needed, attention. audience, validation. She didn't just want to take my life. She wanted to be seen taking it. So I gave her a stage. 2 days later, I sent one message into the group chat we shared with a handful of friends, people who had eaten at my table, laughed in my living room, watched Mara cry on my porch and praised me for being so generous. My message was simple. I'll be stopping by the house this weekend to pick up a few things, I wrote. If anyone's around, feel free to come say hi. No accusations. No drama. Just casual. I knew exactly what would happen. Mara would interpret it as weakness. Evan would interpret it as a negotiation. And their egos would do the rest. By Friday night, Mara had done what I predicted. She posted a story, smiling, cozy, in my kitchen, captioned with something syrupy about a new beginnings. A new beginning. In my house. I watched it from my hotel room, the glow of my screen painting my face pale. My fingers were steady. On Saturday, I arrived at my home at precisely 4 p.m. Not alone. I came with my solicitor, a uniformed officer who was there to keep the peace, and, quietly, an investigator who specialized in identity fraud. We parked across the street for a moment and watched. Cars were lined up outside. People were there. Mara had thrown herself a little housewarming, an announcement party, a performance of victory. I stepped out of the car and felt the cold air hit my face. My body tingled, every nerve awake. I walked toward the front door in my boots, hands relaxed, posture straight. The porch light was on again, even though it was still daylight. I took that in, almost amused. Inside, I could hear laughter through the door, the same bright glass laugh that had greeted me the night I came home to the truth. I rang the bell. The sound echoed. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Mara stood there. She was dressed beautifully, hairstyled, makeup perfect, the kind of woman who looks like she's already decided she's won. She blinked when she saw me, then her gaze flicked over my shoulder to the people behind me. For the first time, her smile faltered. I smiled back, calm, polite, deadly. "Hi," I said softly. "I'm here." Mara tried to block the doorway with her body, but the officer stepped forward slightly, and she hesitated. I walked past her into my home. The living room was full of people holding drinks, smiling awkwardly now that they saw me. Some faces went pale. Some looked confused. Evan stood near the fireplace, tense as a wire. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence form naturally, like a curtain falling. Then I spoke. "Thank you all for coming," I said calmly, eyes moving over familiar faces. "I won't keep you long." I turned slightly and gestured to my solicitor. "I've recently discovered that my identity has been used without my consent," I continued, voice steady, almost gentle. Documents were filed and signatures were forged in an attempt to attach someone else's name to my property. The room changed instantly. A ripple of discomfort, like a cold wind. I kept going. "I want to be very clear," I said. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is fraud." Mara's face tightened. Evan's eyes widened, and I watched him calculate. I took out a folder and held it in my hands. "I have copies of the emails, the bank logs, and the verification details," I said. "I also have forwarded messages showing planning." I looked at Evan then, holding his gaze with calm precision. "I didn't misplace my marriage," I said softly. "You gave it away. And you tried to sell my home with it." Evan's mouth opened. His face twisted, and I saw him prepare to speak, to defend himself, to charm, to manipulate the crowd. I didn't let him. I lifted my hand slightly. No, I said quietly. You don't get to talk your way out of paperwork. The officer shifted subtly beside me, present, watchful. I turned my gaze back to the room. Now, I said, I'm going to ask you all to leave. A few people hesitated. Someone set their drink down quickly. One woman looked at Mara with sudden suspicion, stepping back as if betrayal was contagious. The room began to empty in awkward shuffles and murmured apologies that didn't reach me. As the last guest stepped out, Mara's composure cracked. Her eyes flashed with something ugly. Evan took a step toward me, hands out like he was approaching a frightened animal. I stood still. The house was quieter now, just the faint hum of the fridge, the distant sound of a car passing outside. I let the calm settle like dust. This house is legally mine, I said softly. Any attempt to change that without my consent is criminal. Mara's lips moved. Her hand went to her stomach again, the old prop. I glanced at it and felt nothing but disgust. You are not pregnant, I said simply. Mara flinched, the tiniest crack in her performance. I turned to the investigator. Would you like to explain what you found? I asked, even though I won't repeat his words here. Mara's face drained of color as he spoke. And then, like I predicted, the betrayal devoured itself. Mara's eyes snapped to Evan, sharp as broken glass. Evan's eyes snapped back, furious and terrified. Their mouths moved. Their hands gestured. They began to turn on each other, their partnership collapsing the moment it stopped being convenient. I watched them with a stillness that felt almost holy. When Evan finally looked at me again, his face crumpled into something pathetic, tears, regret, the familiar plea of a man who only understands loss when it lands on him. I felt a pulse of something in my chest. Not love. Not even hate. Just the last thread of illusion snapping. I stepped closer to him until I could see every detail of his face, the dampness at the corner of his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the tremble in his lips. And I spoke softly, so softly it felt like a secret. You weren't manipulated, I said. You were finally honest. Evan's shoulders sagged. Mara made a sudden sound, rage, humiliation, her body jerking like she'd been slapped by consequences. The officer stepped forward then, calm and procedural, and the scene shifted from personal drama to legal reality. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. The law did what it was meant to do when the truth is documented. By the end of the evening, Mara was no longer standing in my home like she owned it. By the end of the evening, Evan was no longer pretending this was a misunderstanding. They left in pieces, pride shattered, lies exposed, their new beginning reduced to a public exit. When the door finally closed behind them, I stood in the quiet and listened. The silence was enormous. It pressed against my ears, against my chest. I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt myself, slowly, deliberately. The click was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. I leaned my forehead against the wood for a moment and let my eyes close. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from release. My home smelled faintly like wine and perfume, like someone else's story had tried to stain my walls. I walked through the living room, picking up discarded napkins, straightening a cushion, reclaiming small things. Then I went to the kitchen and opened the windows. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, and it filled my lungs like truth. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the darkening sky. I thought about my mother, about the day I signed for this house with trembling hands. I thought about how proud she would have been of me, not for being kind, but for being strong when kindness was abused. I turned off the lights one by one, walking through each room like a quiet ceremony. And when I reached my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the space beside me where Evan used to sleep. It was empty. It would stay empty. I felt grief then, real grief, heavy and raw. Not because I missed him, but because I missed the woman I used to be, the one who believed love protected her from betrayal. I placed my palm on the mattress and breathed slowly. Then I lifted my head and spoke into the quiet, voice barely above a whisper. If you were me, I said, would you have forgiven him? And the silence answered the only way it could, by reminding me that forgiveness is something you give when someone asks for it honestly. They hadn't asked. They'd tried to take. So I didn't forgive. I reclaimed. And for the first time in a long time, I slept in my house without feeling like I had to defend my right to exist inside it.